So I was trying to think, what evidence do I have that teenagers do have very good memories? And I think, look at the way they use smartphones, for example. I see I've got two teenagers at home. I see just how knowledgeable they are, their memory for the icons, the way they can flick between different apps, different programs. Their use of social media is phenomenal, and so much of that is to do with memory. And the skills that they have, my daughter in particular is fantastic. She is able to take pictures, apply filters to them, get things out on social media. Just think about the teenagers that you work with, their knowledge of music lyrics, of dances, of sports, statistics. My son is hugely interested in sports, and he can rattle off all sorts of facts and figures about the sports he's interested in. The social information as well. And Michael was saying that party 2 weeks ago, who said what to whom and what's happened since. So we know that from experience, teenagers' memories are very good in lots of ways. And also, they show us, as we challenge them in the exams they're doing, in their practicals, going through interviews, moving into new areas of life, going on to different educational settings. They impress us all the time. Obviously, some aspects of memory are quite different, again, as Michael was saying, in teenage years, just as they are at different times of life. It's not only then that the memory is changing, although clearly the neuroscience would suggest that it's changing quite rapidly at that time. But when I was thinking about my family life, listening to a conversation, I've got a little 7-year-old at home as well, listening to him talking to his, say, 70-something grandfather, reflecting on the way they talk, says to me that they're remembering and they're thinking quite different ways. A 7-year-old thinks and remembers quite differently from a 70-something. And talking to my teenagers, conversations that I'm sure you have as well with teenagers, which are wonderful and can be very frustrating and illuminating and revealing, sometimes show great differences in the way we think, but also, I think quite reassuringly for me sometimes, some similarities too in the way that we think and the way that we learn. I chose this concept as, which actually is sort of slightly similar to this, big screen, people sitting in fairly comfortable seats. The idea of a cinema. I wanted to think of something that might represent a particularly good environment for teenager learning in particular. If we're thinking about teachers trying to find the right environment, the right setting, the ingredients to good learning. My 7-year-old might not get so much out of this. He might be a bit fidgety and he might want to be doing other things. But I think that there are lots of reasons, again reflecting what Michael was saying about why this might be a very good learning environment for teenagers. Thinking in particular from an advertising point of view, that period before the film starts, sitting in the cinema, lights are down, adverts come on the big screen. I think there are lots of reasons why that is a particularly strong time to activate teenagers' learning. Just think about now, just in your own mind, some of the reasons why that might be such a valuable time for advertisers to put a lot of money actually into some big adverts, because they know in terms of teaching things and getting activating memories, they know it's going to work. Again, thinking of what Michael's talked about teenagers maybe wanting to be with other teenagers, that's the sort of place they might go to, away from their families possibly. He said, chimed with me about finding a space where they can explore sort of heightened senses as well, go and get extra thrills. It's that time when teenagers particularly are looking for that. The cinema might be a place to get those things, a place with heightened senses, heightened emotions. So before the film starts, what a great time for advertisers, because the teenagers who are sitting there have other friends probably sitting there to talk to. We know that if you can chat a bit with somebody, maybe while some aspects of teaching, like an advert, is playing, that's going to be an important part of embedding the memories. Seeing it from a different point of view, talking it through, vocalizing things. So there's a good learning moment there because they're sitting with other people. They haven't got their phones on, at least the big adverts come on to tell them not to have their phone on, so it should be a time actually when they're not distracted by phones and this audience, this sort of imaginary or not so imaginary audience these days. So their phone isn't there as such a distraction. It's more focused on actually what's happening on the screen in front of them. And they're primed as well. We'll look in a little bit about the power of priming on the memory. But they're being primed. They've seen adverts, unless it's their first time ever in a cinema. They know the kind of thing they're going to see. They're sort of ready for the experience. They're probably primed by their own experience to be looking out for certain adverts, things that they're interested in, their own knowledge. They're expectant. thinking about in terms of teaching, how do you go about creating that sense of expectancy, priming at the start of a lesson? That can be really important for memory. But they're in a good position because they're expecting something, they're ready, motivated, senses activated, and they're ready to be activated by the things that advertisers do so well. The images, think of the powerful images that they use, the way that they will use the really high quality sound system, the colours, the exaggerated sense that it's a huge screen, so everything is really big and bold and loud, action, movement, but also the humour. Lots of the most memorable adverts in terms of the things they've taught you that will stay with you are through humour. They can be exciting, sexy, funny, thought-provoking, emotional, all those things that advertisers do. And then, of course, they've been targeted to the people. The adverts are matched to the film, so there's a kind of targeting going on there. It's information that should be fairly appropriate for the people in there. And then there's that word of mouth thing afterwards. If you've seen a funny advert, probably laugh with the person next to you, you might talk about it later. So it's another aspect of the embedding the memory process that I think is really clear when you just sit and do something as commonplace as watching a film and seeing the adverts beforehand. So maybe we can think about some of those things today in terms of how we create powerful learning and memory experiences for teenagers in particular. So I thought today 2 strands to what I wanted to talk about: challenges to memory and the challenges of memory. Obviously, I know from teaching the challenges to memory, the things that we do these days, the ever more formal exams. In some ways, we've gone to more exam-loaded courses at the moment, but also the coursework, the practicals, the new subjects, the challenge, the levels that we're taking young people to these days, the way we're getting young people to do their own research and to be mature enough to organise their time, and then, as I said before, to take on the challenges of interviews, doing presentations, going to new settings, travelling to those university interviews and visits, and all the new things that they, like Michael said, that they'll need to take on as they go through this maturity through the adolescent years. Challenges to memory then, very clear, and that's the business that I guess most of you are in, of putting those challenges on, helping young people through the challenges. At the time when there are such challenges to memory, again, Michael was showing that, I thought, really clearly, the things that are happening that will make lots of things quite difficult with memory, the distractions, the things, the people, the emotions that are inherently distracting, the ability to maintain energy levels. I've seen in my own young people at home how that can be quite fluctuating, to say the least sometimes. Those times when their energy is absolutely gripped on something, and other times when it's really quite difficult to muster enough energy to do even quite straightforward thinking tasks. Organisation can feel quite dangerous in some ways. You ask a teenager to tidy their bedrooms, and certainly in my experience that can almost seem like a dangerous thing to do because it's going to get things out of order. I know how this works. Following rules and being organised can actually seem to go against kind of survival instinct for young people, as can handing on rules and tips about learning, I think, sometimes. There's a need, it seems, in teenage years to be self-reliant, rebellious, like Michael was saying, at a time, though, when they need focus, they need resilience, they need flexibility and motivation, all of which can be difficult, all of which can be a challenge at this time of life. So what I'd like to do today is maybe look at some of the ways that the techniques that I've used and developed, the memory and learning techniques, how they can possibly provide some of the opportunities that young people need to cope with the adolescent years, maybe giving them some of the space that they need to explore things in imagination, but also to develop things like that organisation, that more mature way of thinking as well. How it might protect them against some of the vulnerabilities that Michael was talking about too, that sort of you need to take risks. Maybe there are some ways you can use your imagination to take risks and to explore things. And so I hope that some of the things I'll talk about will fit in with his talk as well. Picture there of just college students, some of the young people that you'll be dealing with, this sort of age group. Challenged to perform academically, also we see them all the time needing to succeed in lots of different ways. And as Michael was saying there's these really important social, emotional drives of their development, the making of relationships, surviving their changes of feelings, maybe dealing with changes of their family life, making decisions, surviving and thriving in their new settings, really challenging time. So where do I come in? Well, like I said today, I hope that I'll fit in a bit with what Michael's been talking about and possibly link it in also to practice in schools. As we heard at the start there, I had a slightly odd beginning in this. I had a bet with some friends to get into the Guinness Book of Records after watching Roy Castle on Record Breakers. That's where it started for me. Found there was a way I could do it by teaching myself a kind of mental magic trick. Then found out that they'd been these tricks around for thousands of years. Actually, ancient Greeks had been teaching their students how to do what I thought of as mental magic tricks, but actually you could learn to use pictures and stories and do weird and wonderful things and actually memorize playing cards, which is what I did. Got into the Guinness Book of Records twice for that. Turned it then to memorizing anything, numbers, faces, poems, became the world memory champion, but also I was actually still at school at the same time as I did the world records. So I was then putting it into practice in my exams. Quite popular amongst my friends, then showing them some of these techniques that you can save time with and you can get more out of lessons and do well in exams. And then since then I've worked with the BBC, I've done lots of programs, just kind of gone through my own career as well, working with lots of interesting people, then specifically in education. I've had 10 years working in schools, teaching and in school leadership, and working with the Learning Skills Foundation as well on projects like the Junior Memory Championship, where every year we prove that children from all different backgrounds all around the country can be taught some techniques and can do amazing things with their memories. And we work with the teachers in that as well. We show them how to do it, and I'll reveal some of those things that we show them today. So I'm hoping that I can offer some insights from my experiences, that I've learnt techniques as a student myself when I was still the age that you're some of the people that you're teaching, and I've used those since. My experiences in working with lots of interesting people in memory. I did a documentary, worked on a documentary recently about taxi drivers in London and the techniques they use to master the knowledge. And fascinating to see the sort of things that we can pick up from them, maybe transfer to students working in teachers in schools. And also I work on Child Genius, as we heard there on Channel 4 every year. Again, looking at some really interesting families and their children and young people and different ways that they can be supported, or maybe not in some cases, but generally supported to enjoy learning and to take on challenges and do amazing things by being shown some techniques, some ways to do it. I hope some of the things I say might give you a chance to try yourself. I'm hoping today you'll try out a few different techniques. I'm also hoping that you'll go off and do some research and think about how things apply to you. Because obviously in this room we've got people at lots of different positions in education, different subjects, different age groups. So it'll be interesting to see how these will apply to you. My background is very much in primary, but I've worked a lot in secondary schools too. I've worked with very little children, 3 and 4 year olds, and they can do it. And I've worked with people 70s, 80s and upwards, and they can do it. So I'm quite hopeful that I can show people how they can improve their memories. I work with actors on improving their lines. I work with people in business. I've not found anyone yet who isn't able to do it. It's interesting, according to the statistics say, official statistic is that 90% of drivers believe that they've got above average driving abilities, which is sort of an interesting spin on statistics and our judgments on things. I would say, in my experience, 90% of people I meet say they've got below average memory capacities, even though they're often people that are demonstrating amazing memories all the time. So I think that everybody can develop more memory confidence. I think in some ways, teenagers are at times of great confidence, like Michael was showing, and also sometimes times of the absolute opposite, times of extremes. Part of the point of being an adolescent, it seems, is to explore some of these different extremes, but we know that there are swings of temperament. I think it's a really valuable thing, actually, that we can use, and lots of the memory techniques I use are about using emotions and harnessing feelings, and that tension that comes between sort of big swings of emotion. You can actually use it in your learning. And I've shown people how they can do very serious things. They can pass important exams. They can do really important real-world stuff by imagining really bizarre things in their minds and exploring lots of emotional reactions to things. And I love that feeling Michael said. I recognise from children that I know, young people I know, about this idea of being on stage all the time as teenagers, imaginary audiences, sort of being the centre of attention. I'm really clear that in my experience you can use that. You can show teenagers how they can make the most of this kind of the audience. They can act, they can explore their emotions really effectively. In terms of the sort of the neuroscience and the thinking about the psychology, things move very quickly. And one thing that's very clear is that there's very much tension in our thinking and our understanding of what's going on in memory, tension between the different parts, the different systems that are operating in memory. Just like there are different tensions in our needs for memory, different times of life, different priorities. We know that we used to think of the brain very much like a computer. I think that was quite an easy analogy to use. We thought about memory in terms of computer memory. I think quite quickly we realised that it wasn't a great example at all. Actually, it's not a very clear model. Our brains aren't like computers. Most of the time, put some information into a computer, it will generally come out the other end the same. Our brains don't quite work like that. They're much more uncertain. They're brilliant because they'll do things that computers can't at different levels of creativity, different speeds. But in terms of just the stuff in, stuff out system, we know that our brains aren't like that. But the advantages, what we're going to look at today, that's where the advantages are because of that creativity and the tricks we can play on our memory. We know that our brains change throughout our life. We know there are tensions between different needs, different times. You talk to older people sometimes, they feel great tension between their short-term memory, which might be really challenging, their long-term memories, which can be phenomenally rich, and some of the emotional effects that can have. We used to talk a lot more about left and right brain, as we've heard so far that we tend not to go down that road now. It can be a very limiting idea. But we do know that we think in a kind of logical way in certain ways, and also that sort of old left brain idea and the kind of random creative right brain. We know that there are some different tensions, different tasks will bias towards one or the other. There are ways that we can combine the two. We certainly don't have to be labelled as one or the other. We think quite a lot these days about System 1 thinking and System 2 thinking. I can recommend, you may have read it already, a book, Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking, Fast and Slow. He reflects a lot on this model of it's a little bit linked to left and right brain actually, but it's also to do with sort of maturity of thought. But he's looking at how within our brains we sometimes use that instinctive System 1 thinking, possibly a little bit like that instinctive, impetuous teenage sort of reaction to things, but there's also the System 2, more adult, more mature thinking. There are advantages at different times to both. Combining them can be really powerful, but there's a real tension sometimes between different sorts of thinking. We know that thinking happens, memory in particular happens in a very complex way in the brain. It's certainly not as simple as saying this is where this memory is stored, that's where that memory is stored. Brain scanning shows us that, and more work on human brains shows us that all the time. We also know that, it's actually not that far back in human history that we thought that the heart was more of the sort of seat of thinking, really. Humans obviously recognized that they were excited and scared, their heart beat faster. So there was a sort of logic to thinking that the heart was where the thinking was going on. We now know it's obviously more to do with the brain, but there's a lot of interesting research now about the whole body and its role in learning and remembering. I certainly know that if I suddenly remember something that was really important and I have that horrible feeling, I've forgotten it and it's going to cause problems, I know that feeling isn't just in my brain. I can feel that feeling in my whole system. And I'm sure there's a good reason why we talk about gut instinct for things. And actually there's research now about the memory of different organs of the body, the gut's role, the digestive system's role in remembering as well. So we know that memory actually affects a lot of our system, our whole body. And there's a lot of interconnections as well. Lots of the techniques that I use rely on imagination, but also activate some of those things. For example, if you imagine a bright yellow lemon sliced in half. Open one of the halves and see that glistening juice on one half of the lemon. If you imagine licking that lemon now with your tongue, if you're like me, you can actually sort of feel your body reacting to that. You can sort of feel the saliva flowing, and there's something physical that happens, even though there's not a real lemon here. You're not doing it, but your body can be tricked into a physical reaction to things. Just as your heart will beat faster when you're thinking scary thoughts, and there's not actually any threat there. The scratch of a nails down a blackboard. I can imagine that sound and that feeling now, and I can feel a physical reaction to it. I sort of wince a little bit. Polystyrene, do you ever get that when rubbing blocks of polystyrene from packing together? That's an awful sound for me. The memory of that now is enough to create a physical reaction. And there are certain ways that we can use that in our learning. It makes sense if that's how we remember those things, we can use them. Daniel Kahneman uses, you can see that, uses an optical illusion in his book. He shows this picture and uses it to illustrate several things, but most people, when they see that picture, there's three figures. The one on the left looks, I hope it still looks on the big screen, looks quite a bit smaller in height, looks shorter than the one on the right. If you know, obviously you've seen optical illusions, you're kind of ready to realise that you've been tricked a bit. If you move that up the screen, you can see actually they're the same height. So the one on the left is actually the same height, but lots of things are happening in that picture to trick your brain. And it's a good example of sort of system one thinking and system two thinking and the tension between them. We are being fooled by the sort of sense of perception and this sort of the trick that it looks 3D, although it's actually a flat picture. And even though I know, looking at that now, I now know, I have proof that figure 1 and figure 3 are the same height, I still can't believe it. Even when I look at it, I can't quite bring together those two sides of my thinking. There's that tension between different aspects of thinking. But in the learning techniques that I've used and I've taught to people, you can often get energy from those tensions. You can do logical things and creative, bizarre things at the same time, and it can be very powerful. We need to use both sides of our thinking in a sense, both these kind of systems of thought, probably because of the way that we've evolved from learning about our personal environments. Obviously there was a time in our evolution when we had quite a small world. Our small personal environment, our bodies, the area around us was the field that we had to know a lot about, and we're certainly well adapted to be affected and to remember things that touch us, that are in our close environment. And you can do a little experiment. I hope you'll try some of these things out with the students you work with, because I think they're quite illuminating in terms of the way our memory works. But you can do a quick experiment now. If you, for quite cathartic this can be, imagine destroying some things. So I will tell you an item, and in your imagination, no one can see you, so you can do it, have much fun as you like. Imagine destroying this item as noisily, messily, appropriately as you possibly can. Imagine what it would feel like and look like and sound like. So a chair. So you imagine a chair. Might as well make it a really expensive chair or a modern chair or a precious chair. Imagine smashing, burning, ripping apart that chair. And now do it with a clock. You could be pulling the springs out, hearing what it sounds like. Could be a clock in Big Ben, smashing it with a great big mallet, doing something physical, being violent. A vase, so make it a really expensive Ming vase, drop it from one of these things up in the ceiling, or roll it down the stairs, smash it powerfully on the floor. Let's do a television. Imagine a TV, could be your most beautiful expensive TV set. Imagine how you would destroy it, what it would look like and sound like and feel like to destroy it. And then let's do a comedy cartoon classic, a piano. Imagine destroying a piano. Maybe get some friends to help you and think how you would destroy the piano. So the idea is that by engaging with information, sometimes that's the step that I think stops people from really learning about things and developing strong memories. They're not engaging with it. That's one way to engage with it, is to imagine something physical. So now the idea is that if I say an item, you should know very quickly if I mentioned it earlier or I didn't. You should know it because you'll have an emotional, physical, sort of imaginary reaction to it. So if I said clock, yeah, you can remember the clock. If I said fridge, you sort of know straight away. And the idea with some of these techniques is that I think you experience some different sorts of recall, rather than having to, like often in life, we're trying to think, was it that? What was the answer? You're a bit kind of vague. Some of these techniques are powerful because you know things instantly. What about a chair? Yeah, sofa? No, so you're learning maybe in a slightly different way. When we connect things to ourselves personally, that has a particularly powerful impact. So, for example, we're going to connect just some shopping list items to your body. Imagine we're going to do it on the left side first, so it's going to be your left foot, left knee, left elbow, left hand. So it's up the left side, and then the same at the right side. So you can memorize 8 bits of my shopping list, or somebody's shopping list. So on your left foot, now you've got to use your imagination, really try and picture this and feel this. There is a banana on your left foot. So it could be squashed between your toes, it could be balanced on your left foot. It could be a ripe banana, mouldy banana. Smell it, touch it, squash it. There is a banana on your left foot, and if you wriggle your toes, that sort of connects it to that bit of your body. Let's have an egg on your left knee. So it could be frying on your knee, smashed against your knee, balanced on your knee. But actually imagine it there. Then on your left elbow, toothpaste. So imagine there's a smudge of toothpaste, or you squirt toothpaste on your left knee. You use a toothbrush to clean it for some reason. There's no sort of reason to lots of these things, but it will let you experience some learning. And then in your left hand, chocolate. So it could be, imagine squeezing a bar of chocolate to make it melt, or holding your favourite chocolate, or having your whole hand encased in chocolate. And then on your right side, so again, we'll start with your right foot. So let's have butter. So imagine sort of smearing some butter onto your right foot. So it could be on your shoe or on your toes, butter on your foot. Right knee, kitchen roll. Imagine now wrapping your knee in some kitchen roll. Imagine what that would feel like a sort of mummification of your right knee in kitchen roll. Then two more, your right elbow is going to be milk. So imagine there's milk dripping out of your elbow for some reason. You can even get there, you can taste a bit of the milk. And then in your right hand, some cheese. Your favourite cheese or your least favourite cheese. A lot of these techniques involve lots of different layers of learning. So if you can include your emotions, your feelings, your actual opinions about things, it makes it even more powerful. So the idea is now you've sort of loaded your personal space with information. So just go back through it in your mind, see if you can remember, you can call these out quickly. Your left foot, and then your left knee, and your left elbow, and your left hand, and then your right foot, and your right knee, and your right elbow, and your right hand. And then if I said if we make now just turn it back into an abstract list, which could be a really important list. It could be a list of key points for an essay, or for a presentation, or for an interview, or the key facts you wanted your children, your students to remember. So it could just be an abstract list now. What came before the chocolate? And what came after the kitchen roll? So it's in a creative, sort of odd, bizarre, surreal way, but it's also in a very organised way. And again, I hope that when you remember these things, you know for sure. You're not sort of thinking vaguely, but if you know it, you really know it. It was an egg because it was frying there, and it was kitchen roll because it was wrapped round there. Lots of the techniques involve activating senses. If you think about how things sound, for example, sometimes just getting students to think about the sound of a word and getting them to say it and sort of play around with the sound of words can really help. There was a little experiment we did once with about some young people learning science terms like potassium, and they were practicing saying it in some different ways. Manganese, zinc, they were using the sounds of the words to create another level of learning. So they were sort of listening to their voices, their sounds, they were exploring the language, creating a sort of sound memory as well. I've also worked with people exploring their touch, because like I said, with say the blackboard, you can imagine that feeling, you can imagine feelings, you can include feelings and senses in your learning. Let's say you were trying to learn we were doing something a while ago about some different things in a PE lesson, so they were learning some different sports, thinking about, can you imagine what a javelin feels like? If I really think about it, I can imagine touching a javelin, holding onto a javelin, getting a sense of touch into my memory of it, holding a shot put, how heavy that will be, and the cold metal against me as I'm holding this shot put. The sand in the long jump pit, I can actually imagine feeling that, the texture of the sand. Bringing taste into things. There's no reason why you can't use tastes. Very, very powerful. And again, to do with evolution, it's very likely that we've evolved very powerful memories for tastes of things. We know straight away if things aren't good for us, but we also know the things that we really like. So let's say a list of countries. If you had to learn Germany and Brazil and Japan, if you think about sauerkraut, if you can taste sauerkraut, I can immediately now create a bit more of a powerful memory for the concept of Germany just by thinking of a taste of sauerkraut. Brazil nuts for Brazil. Imagine the crunch, the taste of a Brazil nut. I can actually just about imagine that taste now. Japan, I don't know, some sushi. I can imagine sort of seaweedy, fishy sushi. So you can definitely imagine tastes. And it's interesting, can you imagine smells? I don't know. Certainly we know that smells are, when they activate memories, they're the most powerful triggers of all. Think of how powerfully a particular smell can take you back to a whole time of life, to a whole experience. They're connected with lots of other senses as well. Could you use smells somehow in learning, the smells of different things? Let's, the Olympic rings, if you needed to learn the order of the Olympic rings for some reason, blue, yellow, black, green, red, could you do that through smells, possibly? Think of something that's blue, so the blue cheese smell. Could you imagine that? The smell of something yellow would be like a sunflower. The smell of something black, that petrol-y, black, oily smell. I can imagine that smell. Green, the smell of cut grass often is a good smell for something that's green. Something red, can you imagine, I don't know, a particular fruit, strawberry, something like that? Certainly, you can use smells to, again, to give another level to learning. And we know that we're learning all the time with our bodies. Like I said before about how we're activated by feelings, that sinking feeling when you've forgotten something. Actually, the opposite as well, a great positive sense of success and a good feeling when you remember something. And there's plenty of research about how even just your posture, whether you're smiling or frowning, affects the way you think as well. Just putting a physical smile on your face actually makes you more open to humour and makes you think in a more creative way. Whereas sometimes it's actually useful to be frowning and to be more sort of constrained. That's more linked to that system 2 logical thinking. People tend to be able to do hard calculations better when they're in that sort of pose rather than if they're smiling. Try it yourself sometime and just see it. Generally, it seems to be harder to do tough maths if you're smiling than if you're sort of frowning. There's maybe reasons why we have thinking postures, why we might scratch our heads, why we might frown at certain things. In terms of evolution, we're evolved to remember negative emotions. I think that's something that we know to our cost often. It's a very important thing. Learning, it's easy to remember the things that have gone wrong. It's easy to remember feelings of sadness when we're scared about things, when we're embarrassed. Memories can take us to negative experiences in a very sort of holistic way, bringing in all lots of other senses, getting us to relive it. And I guess it's in our interests to relive the things that were dangerous so that we don't repeat them. Lots of my memory techniques are about actually creating sort of embarrassing situations so that you do remember them, but in a useful way in your head. It's possible to create a very different environment for learning, though, because lots of young people maybe do have quite a fearful attitude to learning. It's connected to feelings of threat. Learning can be quite a scary thing. But it is possible to be able to turn that around and have a more organised approach. But often our brains are putting us in quite a difficult place for learning. Often it's stressful, it's an exam condition, it's being put on the spot in class, and that can reinforce the feelings of memory being a scary thing, being about threat. So I think it's worth remembering that we seem to be wired to think of memory in terms of threat, and we might have to do some things when we're teaching to make it less of a threatening experience, or to use that threat in a sort of safe way. For me, I've got a picture here. This is the Daintree rainforest in Australia. For me, that really does represent the opposite of that sort of threat. It represents to me calm and happiness and mental strength. From my experience, it was a place I went with my family a couple of years ago, and it comes back to me as a place of just being out in the fresh air, in natural circumstances, openness and sort of calm. A place where I feel like I could probably learn well. Like we were taken around by a tour guide who taught us lots of things that I can still remember. I think I was in probably quite a good mood for learning and a good place for learning. But I think it also represents a stage of our evolution as well. At the period we've gone through when we were evolved to learn about our natural environment, the space around us. That was the world that we needed to know about. And we needed to know about it in great detail. So we do seem to be very well adapted to remember senses, to remember things about nature, to remember birds and animals and weather conditions. Roots, we'll look at roots in a bit as well. We're very well wired up to learn roots around an environment. And I think it also represents a stage in our human development individually as well. That the childhood, maybe, it's a great think about children do tend to learn in a very powerful way outdoors, in the fresh air, when they are exploring things through their senses, having adventures. So in some ways, that concept for me rams up a lot of those ideas of powerful, fearless learning, contrasted with something like that, a sort of picture of a city, a map. Evolutionary terms, it's that move to collective knowledge, away from just our own environments and our own smaller worlds, to actually being part of a bigger world and needing to share. We can't remember it all ourselves, so needing to collaborate. Maybe also being quite stressful. We don't know everything. Is that person going to be reliable? Do we know what we're supposed to remember? We're being tested. It's a more stressful sort of model of learning for me. But I think it's one that we'll recognise in terms of the sort of learning we have to do as we grow up through education. I see it this year with my littlest son, not so little now, is in year 3, so he's in juniors in school. For him, it seems to have changed from that outdoor exploration, using the senses. He's very aware now it's more about important stuff and the rules of things, the rights and the wrongs. There's more jeopardy in learning. He's being tested more already. I think teenagers very much are coming through this phase now where they're obviously still very eager to be taking risks and exploring and finding new passionate experiences and heightened sense experiences, but they're also being challenged to work within this more constrained, more logical world. And this is an artwork actually we bought in a gallery in the rainforest and brought it home, and it's on my wall at home now, and it's called Resilience, which it was a great title. It represents for me a lot about strong, resilient learning. I don't know what sort of images you have when you think about strength and learning. For me, this is about collaboration. There are 2 trees there sort of helping each other, woven together with strong roots. One of the trees is more sort of symbolic with hard lines, the other one's more colourful, so there are 2 sort of sides to thinking. But it's about, maybe the leaves have gone, but it's all part of a cycle of nature, things have kind of come back again. But I think it's a good example of resilience for me, and represents lots of things about strong learning as well, like using logic and creativity, working with other people, having strong foundations and strong techniques that we can teach people to use. Think about how strong and resilient are your memories from earlier. Did we mention a phone? Did you smash up a phone? No. Did you smash up a piano? Yes. See if you can remember what you had dripping from your right elbow. Milk, exactly. So I think well-encoded memories with lots of different layers will stick with you. Imagery is very important. The image for me just to represent storytelling, very important part of learning. Imagination in general, I think, is so important into memory. Oliver Sacks had mentioned of him before. He talks about every act of memory being to some degree an act of imagination. You think about the way memories are changed every time you remember them, and imagination plays such a huge part in the way we learn. We're programmed, I think, to use stories, to look for patterns. We tell ourselves stories about how we've come to be here and where we're going in the future. We obviously, for thousands of years, and longer, we've passed on information through stories. So the techniques that I use, just like advertisers do and politicians, they will embed stories, and great teachers, I think, just naturally will put stories into their teaching. So it's possible to create memory stories that are funny and engaging and have the senses and work. And you can do this in every subject. Obviously, I'm picking sort of random abstract things like shopping lists today, but there's no reason why it couldn't be that really important list of behavioural rules, or that list of topic titles, or the names, or the systems. You can turn anything into a list in any subject. And you can show young people how they can take control and they can do it themselves. But if you had to, let's say you had to tell us yourself a memory story, we could continue our shopping list from the cheese. Let's tell ourselves a little story, see if you can imagine this. If we had bread, celery, ham, scissors, and apples to remember. So from our cheese, imagine your piece of cheese now, which was held in your hand. Let's imagine wrapping it with the world's biggest slice of bread and cheese. Sort of, there's a nice link there. You're wrapping the cheese with a huge slice of bread, because in imagination things can be surreal and big and odd, and that's what makes them memorable. Then let's spear the whole thing with a big stick of celery. So you're sort of holding it all together with a big stick of celery. Ham. Let's not just have a ham. Let's have the whole pig. So there's a whole pig now walking along your celery. So we had the cheese, the bread, the celery, the pig walking along it. Let's do something horrible. Let's snip off its tail with some scissors. Imagine what that would be like. It's only in your imagination, so there's no pigs will be harmed. But you've got scissors with the tail, and then apple. Let's stick an apple in its mouth just to make it happy again, or something. So you've got, just imagine that story: cheese, bread, celery, ham, scissors, apple. So you can go backwards through it. You had the apple, the scissors. You can start showing people how stories. It's bizarre, but it's the way your brain works. I saw you then. You tend to smile when you're thinking of these odd things. So actually, it's probably quite good for you, because we know that when people are relaxed and happy and creative, they're learning better. Certainly for lots of the sorts of things that we're trying to teach. So it's actually quite good to be thinking of bizarre things. It'll put you in a good mood for learning. And you actually start to see some interesting links. I used a lot of these techniques when I was studying for university exams with lots of different English literature essays to remember. And by turning things into lists of key ideas and pictures, I found that I could create all sorts of stories that show me the links. I was using that same image in certain places. And I had a very sort of flexible way of dipping into different bits of information, because the imagination showed me the patterns and the connections. So it is possible to use the creativity of the brain, all these weird things that the brain can do. Our brains can make remarkable links between things and use that tension. I mean, human beings are amazing. If I told you there was an answer and I said, what's the shape of the smell of coffee, you could probably come up with some sort of answer, which is a remarkable leap of thinking, really. It'll all be a bit different, but what's the shape of the smell of coffee? We can make these odd connections. If I said, she's as tall as she is funny, how tall is she? You can make sort of odd links in your mind. You can bring together whole different spheres of thinking. Lots of our jokes rely on surprises, of sort of putting two ideas together. Two fish in a tank, one says to the other, do you know how to drive this thing? Yeah, that's obviously a very funny joke, but obviously it's based on, lots of jokes are based on surprise. Why don't cannibals eat clowns? Because they taste funny. Even just, you might not think it's funny, but even just trying to understand it means your brain has to make some odd connections, and we can use those connections in learning. We can connect things in a logical order in a very creative way, and all the best techniques that I've used involve both those things. Using the imagination, using senses, but also creating order. You can imagine this. Just imagine in front of you now a cabinet, which is your design. Might as well make it nice and beautiful, lovely wood, expensive cabinet. 3 open shelves on the left, 2 in the middle, and 3 on the right. So 8 spaces now, 3 on the left, 2 in the middle, and 3 on the right. And if you had to learn, I got some information we were doing with it for a geography lesson, so some different geography, some weather terms. We can just put something in each of those shelves in our mind that will remind us, that will be that mental trigger, but we'll try and make it visual, because memory techniques are based on images. We'll try and use other senses, use emotions, and really try and create this thing, because your brain can do it. So in the top, let's work from the top left of the 3 shelves. Rain is the first thing, so let's imagine it's raining in that top shelf. So there is water sloshing out of it. You can see rain clouds in there. Imagine the feeling of seeing water dripping down from that top shelf. The one underneath it, in your mind's eye, imagine it's full of snow. So different senses, it's very cold. You can imagine maybe a little tiny snowman in there. So rain on the top and then snow in that second one down. Wind in the third one down. Obviously, you can't really see the wind, you can see its effect, so maybe you see a little tree in there blowing around, or a big gust of wind blows out of that bottom left shelf, or there's a windsock in there. In the 2 middle shelves, let's have a lightning in the top one, so you can imagine electric lightning flashing across, see the colours of it, imagine the feelings of lightning there. The second one, in the middle, let's have hail, so it's maybe little hailstones. They could actually be dropping, you can hear them like popcorn, little drops of hailstones in that bottom middle shelf. Then on the right-hand side, let's have thunder booming out of the top right-hand shelf. You can, again, bring in that sense of hearing things. Imagine the sound of the thunder. Could be a little god of thunder perched in there as well. The middle shelf on the right has sunshine glowing out of it. Imagine that feeling on your skin as sunshine comes out. The yellow could be painted yellow. Little Miss Sunshine could be in there. And then fog billowing out of the bottom shelf on the right-hand side, so it's filling up, it's actually clouding the whole room, there's fog coming out. So you've used all sorts of different techniques. Obviously, it's easier if you do it yourself. I've sort of talked you through it, but you can do this with young people and show them that you can create this sort of set of information that really works. So now if you go back through it, you should, in the top, see what you can find. What was the weather in the top left? And then underneath it? Underneath that. And then in the middle you had, yeah, and then on the right-hand side. Good, and again, if I said what came before the hailstones, look back and see, yeah, the lightning, and what came after the snow. Yeah, so it's sort of organised in a very efficient way, but in a way that suits your mind, and it's a technique that you can use for all sorts of different things. Quick technique that I found very useful. Sorry, that hasn't come out very well. That's just trying to show you like a room collected with lots of objects. If you ever seen in the first Indiana Jones film, that idea of a big kind of storage place, all sorts of odd artifacts. You can create yourself one of these in your mind, and I found this very useful. If you pick a place now, a real place that you have to pass a few times a day, so it could be your hallway in your house, a cupboard by a classroom in your office, just a real place, and you turn that into your memory store. Every time you have one of those really annoying bits of information to remember, like I don't know, a parent tells you something in a corridor, or a colleague in a meeting suddenly tells you something, or you have an idea and you think, like in the middle of the night even, you have an idea, I hope I remember that. Or create yourself a little picture of it and fix it in place in an imaginative way. So use the senses. If you suddenly remember, I've got to get to the bank before the end of the day, well, imagine, I don't know, stapling some £10 notes, £50 notes to the wall of the room. Or if you've got to go to pick up the dry cleaning, imagine a great big pile of dry cleaning in that room. But bring the senses out, make it exaggerated, make it memorable. The idea is that you can then go back in your mind. We just showed how you can go back into your cabinet and find rain. There's no reason you can't go back into that and find some useful clues in a very memorable form. But also, you physically pass that place a few times a day, so it gets across that tricky thing, remembering to remember something. Every time I walk past that cupboard by my front door, quickly check, oh yeah, I stapled some notes to the bank notes, got to go to the bank. There's some stinking laundry in the corner, so I've got to pick up the dry cleaning, things like that. You can put people in there. I must speak to this person today, have them sitting there in your room. Start playing around with it. And importantly, as you do this, I hope this will inspire you to start equipping the people that you teach as well with these techniques, showing them that they can take on some sort of active control of the memory process and set up some systems. One particularly powerful system is the root system, which is one of those really ancient systems that still works really well. From ancient Greece and Rome, orators would speak from memory by using real roots arranged with powerful images. They could walk back in their mind's eye through a temple or through a city street, and they'd find the different things in place. Really powerful, and I used it to get through my university exams, break world records. You can do it because you know lots of roots. So if you imagine now, right, let's pick 5 places in the place where you live. Just pick 5 little zones. So it could be the front door, the hallway, the kitchen, living room, staircase. Just imagine, you're not going to forget that route, just like you remember the shops on the high street or places where you work. It could even be bits of furniture around a room. But if you pick 5 places you know at home, let's say you had to, let's say we're teaching about the French Revolution, an essay about the French Revolution. One example I found picked out these key points. The clergy. They'd have to learn to make a note about the clergy. So let's have lots of clergy. Think of an image that represents clergy, but put it in the first room of your house. And this could be, you could do it with a shopping list or with anything, but if it was for an essay, let's have some clergy sitting on your front doorstep, for example, wherever the first place in your house, members of the clergy. Obviously, if you're studying for this subject for real, you've got even more images. The next point they wanted to remember was about the nobility. So going to the next place in your mental journey. So in my mind, I'm thinking, right, going to the hallway of the house, and I'm seeing lots of members of the nobility sort of processing regally up and down, very noble, in my hallway. Got to squeeze past them very rudely. Common people was the next point on this essay point list. So in my mind, I would turn right into this living room, and I've got lots of common people lying around, and I'm heightening the smells and the looks and the feelings. So we've got common people sitting in there. Next place is my kitchen, so I'm thinking of the taxation, which was the next point on the list. Think of an image that represents. I've got the tax inspector sitting in there, or maybe piles of money, something about taxes. And then there was the point they wanted about the bad harvest having a role to play. So let's imagine this terrible harvest scene, but playing out on my staircase or wherever your next place is at home. So again, you take the real place, put some images in place, and then when you go back, the idea is that if I go back now in my mind to the first place, I can immediately see, remember what the first thing on the list was? I can see clergy in there, and then I go into the hallway and I can see, and then do you remember what was then in the next place in your route? And then it was taxation, and then finally, bad harvest. And like I say, we're just learning something that we don't particularly need to know now, but things that are real, that are really meaningful, you can teach very easily using this sort of system of using a structure, using the way that our brains are really wired up to learn. So what I'd like you to take from this, I hope, is that there are ways that we can prime people to learn, just like advertisers do. If you're expecting to see something, you're more likely to see it. So in terms of teaching, we can prime people to be on the lookout for certain images, especially if those are going to come up in the learning. We can prime and motivate and get people ready for learning by teaching them techniques as well, so that they're coming into a learning session with a range of techniques. They're ready to use their senses. They're ready to use stories and images, structures and systems, even some of these ancient systems that work really well today. I always think it's good that when teachers start to experiment with it and maybe let their students in on the process as well. Ask them, well, how are we going to learn this? What are we going to actively do to learn this, rather than passing on information and leaving it to them. Let's talk in a lesson about what techniques we could use, what images we could use, what stories we could tell, what senses we could use, what weird and wonderful things we could do. So much more to it. I mean, I think it's once you start thinking about memory, you start thinking about how we test children. When is it most useful to test? We've gone back a few times today. If you go back now and try and remember what was in your left hand on that when we explored different things. It's a bit hard, with the time has gone by, it's a bit hard to remember. But the neuroscience would say that was a good time to practice it, because by thinking of it, just testing yourself just as the memory was fading, was a really good way of making that memory stronger. So if you test young people, not while it's really fresh in their minds, but when it's just had a chance to start to fade, that's a really powerful time to strengthen the memory and to practice the recall of it as well. So it's important to think about testing. It's important to think about motivating young people to use these techniques. They can be fun. I hope you found they can be quite cathartic sometimes. They're a bit bizarre, put a smile on your face, but also they can save time and they can make people more efficient. They can deepen people's understanding by seeing links and by really engaging with information. And it becomes, I've seen it work lots of times, becomes a real collaboration with teachers when they're quite open and they're learning. They say, I've learned some new techniques. I'm going to try some different things. I'm going to try and teach you in a way that maybe mirrors the ancient Greeks, because we're going to learn today by learning things around this room. And the students are shown that the teachers are actively using their memory and maybe starting to weave some of those things into their lessons as well, to activate what we know can be a very frustrating thing, the memory, but also can be extremely powerful. And I think just on that final point, to bring things back full circle with what we heard this in the first session, I think adolescence is a very, very valuable time. It's a time of great sort of frustrations and challenges, but a really fertile time as well to tap into memory for the benefit of students. But I think with just a bit of knowledge, I hope for the benefit of teachers as well. So I hope that's been useful, and good luck. And see what you remember from that tomorrow, from all those weird and wonderful things.